Good afternoon. I know you're all sort of starting to think about dinner, and yes, you have got through to the last session. So I will try and keep this brief, but it is really important, and it's been fantastic hearing of what's being done in the archival world, and even Catherine's presentation there talking about the research and tying that together with pictures and feelings. And I guess this sort of is a natural continuation in a way of that. And so what I want to talk about, we have so much research, we have so much data in this world today, but we have to preserve it, we have to make a difference and actually make an impact with it, not just preserve it so that no one can access it. And I would like to start off with thanking the Kigali Genocide Memorial for allowing me to use these images and to have those as part of this presentation. So if this clicker will work, we'll proceed. There we go. And we're not meaning research data, so I just thought that might just lighten the mode a little bit. That's not what we're here to talk about. Sorry. I couldn't resist. But research data, we really do mean publicly funded research data should be a public good, and it's in the public interest, and it should be made openly available with as few restrictions as possible. And it can exist in so many different formats: print, digital, statistics, interviews, surveys. There's a number of funders which have open data policies, some which require them and some which encourage them. And more funders across the world are requiring open access to not only the actual research, but the data as well. And it's a quote here from Jay Baum, which says that every day we create 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. Try getting your head wrapped around that kind of number. 90% of the data in the world today has been created in the last 2 years. That's a huge amount of data. But who gets to decide what gets kept? Who gets to decide what gets discarded? What can be looked back on? If the data was lost, would that actually make a difference in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, 50 years' time? How do we ensure that all this data is actually easily found and made accessible? And does that data stand alone by itself, or does it need a context? Oops, going the wrong way, that doesn't help. So the value of data preservation. This is some quotes directly from students who have submitted their ethics applications to me in the last month. And it's just a sort of general picture which I see over and over again, talking about destroying the data at the end of their studies. And time and again, I'm rejecting those applications and saying, sorry, go back, do a data management plan, and talk about how we can actually preserve that data and make it openly available. So there is a whole culture that needs to be changed within our academics and within our students growing up through that. You'll see here the underlying data for this paper is openly available, and that's where we want to get to, and that's what research funders are requiring. However, you can see from the student quotes, they haven't got there yet, and that's the sort of culture that we're trying to encourage. And we can see here just a little bit fuzzy on there, but the value of the data preservation, and we've got here that all the data, including the model and the photos, are open and available on Figshare. Compared to, this is why science matters, been asked, got an email about a paper of 20 years old, have a folder with it on my computer for the project, but it's full of unreadable files. Can't actually access that data. So we do have academics who are storing all their work, some of them very meticulously. However, do they have it in a form which can be accessed and reused? Most of the case, no. So good research practice is one of the foundations of high quality research. It has to be robust, reliable, reproducible. So what value is there in data preservation? Increased efficiency for future research, new research, numerous various reasons there. It promotes research integrity, helps for collaborations, can increase citations as well, but no guarantees there. So this is just a little cartoon, because I'm quite a humorous kind of person. But why is a picture worth 1,000 words? Well, how fast do you type? And you can see they're getting your thesis done rather quickly. I just want you to take a look at these images and we will come back through to them. And as you can see, birthday girl, cake, boy out running, boy sitting in a field. I'll just let you have to think of these images and what they mean to you as they are without any actual context there. With that. Yeah, this could actually be a scene from the Jeffersonian, from Bones. Anything with that. So picture, it's worth 1,000 words, or is it? Is it really worth those 1,000 words? People's interpretations of images that you see. When you go to an art gallery and there isn't something which tells you what that picture is trying to interpret, how valuable is that picture? It's valuable in of itself, but if you add that information that goes with that picture, it suddenly takes on a whole new meaning and is far more important and valuable to that and makes more sense and gives you a better understanding of what the artist was actually trying to achieve with that image. Genocide never happens by chance, and the events in Rwanda were no different. And for over a century, there was a context of ethnic separation, and there was lots of power struggles with that. Propaganda was used, images were used which demonstrated and showed different races and how they were portrayed. And it was really the use of propaganda leaflets and radio messages put together. That text with images gave a very powerful message to people who were living in Rwanda at that time. April the 6th, 1994, the Rwandan president was killed when his plane was shot down over Kigali airport. Within hours of that, there was a campaign of terror throughout the country. And I look back to 1994 and I think, well, what was in the news in 1994? I was living in Australia in 1994, and the only thing I can remember being in the news was that we won the right to have the Sydney Olympics in 2000. I don't remember anything about Rwanda being in the news around about then. I remember those things about there being various conflicts and stuff, but it was very much not reported on and not brought to attention. So I'll just let you read through that. But basically, for 3 months after that plane was shot down, killing went on unchecked, and about 1 million people died during that short period of time. That's 10,000 each day, or 100,000, 500 every hour, which is 8 each minute. So it resulted in the deaths of over 1 million people, and that's such a short time. You think 8 every minute. So I've been talking for about 5 minutes. That's 40 people. There are over 300,000 orphans, and over 85,000 children suddenly became the heads of their household. Many families were wiped out, and there wasn't anyone to remember or document their deaths. There was no one to archive who they were, what their lives were. There was no one to create an archive like's been done over here that we've heard. So you can see from those images, when I put those images up by themselves, it didn't have the same impact as when it had the data next to it. When I put up the data in the table, yes, it had an impact, but not as much as when you put those pictures together with that, the actual data which goes with it. It suddenly has a huge amount of impact through that. And we have to be really careful when we've got data sets that we don't just have data sets filed away with nothing which correlates to that. Images are powerful, and however, we can go the other way where we only have the images without the context. We have to have both. You have to have the actual data and the statistics, and you have to have the imagery which goes along with that in order to show and really communicate the value and the richness of that data, and to make an impact with that so that things like genocides don't get repeated. And the Genocide Memorial, in communicating to them about this presentation, what they said was they are very keen that people don't forget, and so therefore they are willing to allow me to use this work today in order to do that. People are quite obsessed with data about their own family and their lives. You look here, this is your create your own family tree, register online. These sites have multiple hits every day. If you have a look, total daily visitors, 342,000. People want to know information, but of those walls of names and those walls of photos, there is no other data. Those photos of those 3 children are only a few which we do actually have details for. The image I showed you before of that bones, they're all bones from people who were killed during the genocide, which have not been identified and probably never will be identified. But they still do need to be remembered. They do still need to have context of how that came about and how that was done. It's great when we have resources and we're able to look at preserving and archiving, but what happens to items within countries like Rwanda where there isn't funding to do that? Who decides what is valuable and what needs to be preserved? Who decides what that is and how we can actually make a difference with it? And this is just, I'd like you to just, those who do have mobile devices, just to bring home and to maybe, I know it's quite a heavy kind of subject bringing through that, but this should lighten. If you just want to go into that Padlet and really say, well, what is this picture that I'm showing you? What is that and what does it actually mean to you now? I'll just give you some time to do that and reflect on that. And if we could do the alt-tabbing, that would be good. Thank you. Hopefully, theoretically, your responses should be coming up on the screen, but we'll give it a minute or two. Yay! Don't be shy. You can be anonymous on it. Okay, so this is going to stay up, so you'll be able to add to it as you go. But due to time limitations, and I don't really want to just stand here for the next 5 minutes or so, that'd be a bit boring. So I will move on. I like that dandelion X-ray, that's really cool. I wish it was. But actually, if we can flick through to the PowerPoint, please. Okay. It's actually a partial map of the internet based on data found on opti.org. So you can see we can actually think different things and we can be very creative and have a think, but without the actual data which goes with it and the context, it doesn't really tell the whole story. And that's how things through history can get distorted and changed. And so it's very important that we are documenting things and making sure that images that we get, collections which we are given, that we go a bit further and we investigate into those and make sure that with any image we have something written. Any of our data sets, we actually have something which tells us what is that data set, what's it about, what does it represent, whether that's a couple of paragraphs or a whole narrative of that which goes through with each image. Often you'll see tweeted there's been 35,000 images released by the British Museum. But what do those images actually mean if they don't have any context through to it? It's fantastic that stuff's being made available like it never has been before, but when you don't have the data to go with it, it loses that value. And the same way, if I give you a pile of statistics and a ton of tables, it's a lot of reading and I'll get through it and I might make some conclusions, but that information would be so much valuable if I had some pictures and guidance to go with it. So a picture paints 1,000 words, but without the data providing the context, the value and impact can be lost. And, you know, we're great at producing charts and figures to accompany our research, but we often neglect to add value to the data sets that are being preserved. And it is a new kind of area of looking at preserving our data sets. But a data set of pictures by itself only tells half the story. And you can see there that, you know, there's real value in using images to promote scientific content. A post in social media accompanied by an image is 10 times more likely to receive engagement. So how do we actually do that? So I've just really taken this back to basics, really, of how do we actually ensure that we are making sure the research data does have impact. Make sure your data sets do have DOIs. Ensure the data sets are quoted in the research output. I'm not going to read through them all, but ensure discoverability and make sure that people can find that. And really do actually ask your academics to think about how they can actually add value to their data sets. If they're coming to you to store them in your repository, make sure that you're actually getting something else from them. That's your time to speak to them, to encourage them, to give you just that little bit extra, because they won't give it to you if you don't prompt them. So, digital information, it's inherently fragile. It's often at risk of loss. And, you know, practice of information begins not when an information source has begun to deteriorate from its use, but with its creation. And, you know, I showed you all those pictures of those children, you know, in Rwanda. And the shame of that is there is rooms which are just walls of images, but there isn't any additional data that goes with it. And as, you know, things go by, without those being digitally preserved, we lose that. There's a building, a church building there in Nyamata, which is full of the clothing of survivors from the not survivors, from those who were killed during the genocide. Over time, though, and over years, those clothes are starting to deteriorate and rot, and give it another 50 years, and there won't be anything there. So it is looking at how can we start to preserve things like that. How can things which are not textual be preserved and made sure that they are restored, and so that that history does not get lost. So storage must be up to a preservation standard, secure, long-time storage with limited network traffic, if preferably none, and preserving the data, but also having a means of reading and opening and using that data and re-looking at that data and how that can be used. It should be discoverable, easily accessible. Don't make things difficult for people to access. If the research is of a high quality and it's worthy of being used, make sure that people can actually use it and can find it. You know, in a world where there is so much data, we have to be able to communicate that, and we have to be able to make it accessible. And really, it is a good thing. So, you know, it does reduce duplication of previous research. It does do replication and verification of research. And what, you know, people in Rwanda find difficult is so much research is behind paywalls, and so they can't access it to get it. They have one wall within their memorial, which is dedicated to other genocides throughout the world. And they've said to me that they'd love to have done more on that, and they'd love to do more research so that they can look at and compare the genocide which happened in their country with other countries. Unfortunately, they don't have the same budgets we do. They don't have journal subscriptions at all. And so they can't access any of that research. They can't access that data. So in many cases, they're actually causing trauma to survivors of the genocide by asking them the same questions that researchers have gone in and asked already. We can really avoid that. And the same when we look at the social science and humanities. There's whole realms of stuff where if we do it properly the first time, we're actually helping those who've become victims of crimes. Apparently 37% of research data created since 2011 is still available. Only 7% since 1991. You can look at those and think how much data, if you turn that around, that's over 60% of that data that's been done up till then is lost, is no longer there. So, looking at, there's new publishing models and data policies being established. There are repositories which are free to use and access. Do encourage your academics to be using those and to be making sure that that research and that data that they've worked so hard to actually get and achieve is actually kept and able to be used. And you notice that PLOS journals actually require their authors to make all data underlying their findings described in their manuscript fully available without any restrictions, with very rare exceptions to that. So if we do have data that's worth preserving, how can we better store it for future generations? And we do have to start looking at that, particularly in areas where it's not being considered at the moment. And these are just real handy hints, really, on preserving your data when you're putting that into your repositories, to make sure that we at least have the basics and we can at least find it. And if we can get these, then we do have a chance there of having that data preserved. And so I was going to ask questions, but I'll leave that till the panel part. And really, we'll just sum up with that. We do a lot of research, more than ever before. We have more data sets available than ever before. We have journals which are just data set journals, journals collecting data sets. We need to be able to access those. We need to be able to see what is valuable, what isn't valuable. We need to be adding data to that to make it valuable. If you look at our birth certificates and death certificates, they contain the very bare minimum data. How amazing would it have been if someone at those times had actually said, well, actually, it'd be great if we had what were their favorite color? What was their, add just that little bit of context. What was their favorite food? What did they like to do in their spare time? And if you think for people who go often searching to find out about their parents or their grandparents or anything, they want that extra value to their data. And whilst that's a personal kind of level, you can take that across the board to and apply it to any way of data and any data set, whether that's scientific or humanities, arts, etc. If you look at indigenous artwork, how much greater it would be if we could have that preserved, rather than at the moment so much of it is fading and we can't see that. You go to Egypt and they have a policy where they don't restore any of the artifacts within Egypt if they're actually, part of Tutankhamun's tomb falls apart. It doesn't get restored. The policy is not to restore any of that. But is there enough preservation going on to keep that available so that people can actually see what it did look like in its preserved state? We have to get better at managing our research data and making it linked up to the actual images as well, and providing context for data sets. Or at the end of the day, we're just going to have a ton of data sets and a ton of different context, which when you merge them together don't actually fit together, and we won't really be able to get the most benefit out of either of those. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back.